A mathematical model can achieve identical accuracy scores across different demographic groups while still producing vastly different error rates for the people it evaluates. Welcome to the Wandt courseware, an AI-narrated technology video series unpacking the latest lectures and thoughts from Professor Adam Scott Wandt. Professor Wandt conducts his research and teaching at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. The presumption of algorithmic neutrality functions as an operational illusion. Mathematical formulas deployed in law enforcement operations actively obscure systemic disparity, codifying statistical bias under the guise of objective data. Deploying artificial intelligence within the criminal justice system alters ground-level operational strategies, erodes established constitutional protections, and mathematically codifies historical biases into future policy. Public sector managers increasingly rely on proprietary black box systems to drive critical policy decisions. By delegating authority to these closed systems, administrators act without transparency into the algorithmic mechanics that govern their jurisdictions. To evaluate this compounding disruption, we must map an individual's chronological exposure to these automated tools. This progression operates across three distinct systemic phases: geographic patrol deployments, constitutional apprehension standards, and finally, judicial sentencing classifiers. Algorithmic bias creates a cascading series of disruptions that permeate the entire judicial architecture. European policing models analyzed by researcher Rosamund van Breugel demonstrate how predictive policing actively shapes law enforcement practices on the ground. These systems rely on a specific foundational input: historical arrest data gathered over decades of police operations. This historical data inherently reflects past systemic policing priorities. It does not provide an objective, neutral measure of all crime committed within a city. The algorithm interprets these historically biased data points, mathematically flagging specific marginalized neighborhoods as high-risk zones. Based on this output, police administrators direct a disproportionately high volume of patrols directly into these newly flagged sectors. Concentrating police presence in a confined geographic area mathematically guarantees a higher rate of new arrests, regardless of underlying crime rates. Those new arrests are instantly fed back into the system's database. This new data seemingly validates the algorithm's initial prediction, strengthening the area's high-risk designation for future deployments. Predictive patrol models manufacture a closed data loop. They actively operationalize systemic bias and steadily erode the fundamental right to non-discrimination. The consequences of this patrol data feed directly into the second phase of the justice pipeline, the moment of physical apprehension and search. Legal scholar Andrew Ferguson highlights the constitutional friction generated here, specifically regarding the Fourth Amendment's explicit protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. This framework was defined by the Supreme Court in Terry v. Ohio, establishing the strict standard of reasonable suspicion required to justify a police stop and frisk. The Terry standard strictly requires direct, individualized, and observable behavioral evidence by an officer before initiating a stop. The mechanics of algorithmic hotspot designations and predictive personal risk scores operate in direct contradiction to this individualized standard. Automated tools generate geographic risk profiles based purely on generalized statistical probabilities, pooling demographic averages into a location score. Allowing these generalized probabilities to replace direct human observation during physical police encounters presents a severe legal danger. Relying on aggregate algorithmic data to satisfy reasonable suspicion systematically bypasses legal checkpoints and undermines the constitutional validity of physical stops. The pipeline concludes in the final phase, where algorithmic risk classifiers are utilized by judges to inform high-stakes sentencing and bail decisions. The journalism outlet ProPublica conducted a comprehensive investigative audit of a proprietary tool called Compass, an algorithm widely used across United States courts to assess recidivism risk. To understand the tool's mechanics, we must define predictive parity. This is the algorithmic objective of achieving equal overall accuracy across all demographic groups. The competing standard is error rate balance, which demands equivalent rates of false positives and false negatives across those same demographic groups. The core statistical revelation of the Compass audit exposes a mathematical incompatibility. Forces within the data demand a trade-off between these two definitions of fairness. An algorithm usually cannot satisfy both simultaneously. This chart shows the system successfully achieved predictive parity, presenting a facade of unbiased functionality by displaying equivalent overall accuracy. However, examining the expanded variables reveals a devastating error rate imbalance hidden within. The system falsely predicted Black defendants would recidivate at vastly disproportionate rates. That 44.9% false positive rate functionally penalizes one demographic at nearly twice the rate of another, despite the tool's mathematically calibrated overall accuracy. Delegating judicial authority to proprietary algorithms creates an unacceptable operational risk. In these environments, hidden mathematical formulas dictate systemic deprivations of individual liberty. A single individual experiences the compounding weight of all three algorithmic cases as an unbroken structural progression. Biased historical data injected at the patrol level cascades downward, mutating into constitutional violations during apprehension and solidifying into statistical sentencing disparities. Predictive technologies do not eliminate human bias. They merely launder it into an unassailable mathematical format. Law enforcement administrators face an immediate operational mandate. They must require rigorous, independent impact assessments prior to the procurement of any predictive technology. Public agencies must demand absolute transparency and auditable standards for any algorithmic tool used to justify searches, stops, or detentions. These technologies require democratic oversight. They must be subjected to public scrutiny rather than hidden behind the protection of corporate trade secrets. Public sector managers must strictly balance their security objectives with the uncompromising preservation of fundamental constitutional rights. Like, follow, and subscribe for more deep dives into emerging technology, digital investigations, and the ideas shaping our future. And remember, stay curious and want knowledge.